So friends, if you are relatively new to this community and have never experienced a Tapestry of Faith before, it's a regular occurrence at Leichhardt Uniting Church, and it's been around for a few years, where every so often someone will interview a member of the community and hear about their life and their faith journey. And the idea is that we are connected by our stories. And so when we hear someone else's story and the ways in which God has weaved through their life, we can hear moments of connection, and we may hear things in their story that are different. And that's okay, because the whole idea is that we are literally weaving together a tapestry with all of our stories to be this community. I asked Sonia to be interviewed for a Tapestry of Faith some months ago, and I'm so delighted that we get to do this today. Sonia and Megan, well, I don't want to, no spoilers. So Sonia is a delight, and I thank you so much for being willing to do this. I'm excited. So what I want to do is pray, and then we'll get cracking. Let's pray together. God, may your Holy Spirit rest upon this sacred space as we hear a story of a beloved member of this community. We give thanks for the gift of story, and we pray for Sonia as she shares so openly and vulnerably with those in this room and those who are joining us via live stream, that we may connect with her, the moments of her story that we are familiar to us and the moments that are different, and rejoice in the power of story to bind us together. In your name, amen. Let's start at the very beginning. All right, origin story. Tony gets it. Tell us about your beginnings. Tell us about your childhood. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up in country Queensland. My father was a cane farmer. He was born on the land, and we lived on a cane farm. Grew up that way. I'm the oldest of three children. So I helped my dad a lot on the farm, and I guess it was a pretty nice way to grow up, just being in nature and seeing things that were, my parents chose not to have a TV, so we were, they wanted to encourage us to be outdoors and doing things with nature, and so that was quite I guess it was a creative way to have an upbringing, because you had to create your own fun and interest, and there were no devices, so we're outside doing all sorts of crazy things, like, I don't know, thinking we were playing cricket for the World Cup, all sorts of crazy things, but it made for a creative upbringing.
How is it? I mean, you live in the kind of the middle of Sydney now. Do you miss that, running out in nature kind of feeling? Is that still a sacred thing for you, or,
It's kind of interesting, because in some ways I think about it now, and I actually have photos of where I actually grew up, the farm, and like literally the farm was the horizon, like that was the end of the property type of thing. And I look at that and I go, I don't think I could live there now. That would be just too, it would just feel too, I don't know.
Isolated, or?
Yeah, totally isolated. Yeah. It's just so bizarre, because, and growing up, we would be driving like on the roads, because it was so remote, without licenses,
Wow.
My dad had motorbikes that he would let us ride. So I was driving way before I had a license. And I'd be driving on these back roads, just the dirt roads, and sort of thinking like I was on the end of the earth, like no one would know that I was there doing all these illegal things. And to go back there and to see that this particular back road that was the end of the earth is now this incredible space that's being built into this big school, and like it's just, yes, I don't know that I could necessarily live in that sort of an environment again, but it was a great way to grow up.
And did you grow up in a religious family? Was church a part of your life growing up?
Oh, very much so. My mum, she was born into the Adventist faith. So she, from her parents were already Adventists, and she was very committed to that. So I was born into that as well. My dad, he became an Adventist when he was in his 20s, and it was really through the ministry of his observation of his neighbours. He, every time, even to this day, that I see my dad, he tells me about his conversion story. So I'm 48, so I've heard it many times. So he very much, I guess we were fortunate because my mum had that sort of almost like what I'd call a blind faith, because that's all she knew. Whereas for my dad, for him to become an Adventist, he sort of, like his dad actually sort of disowned him. And because my grandfather didn't really think too well of the church, and I guess he'd grown up in an era when he'd heard all the stories about what happened with, what churches did, the really bad things type of thing. So from my dad's perspective, it was more, he could see the grey, and it was more about what's the principle behind the what God's message is. Let's stick to the principle and understand the principle, as opposed to let's just follow these black and white rules.
Interesting. Okay. So. And what was it like for you to grow up in an Adventist family? What did that look like?
Oh, well, especially in Bundaberg, these weirdos, that go to church on a Saturday, and the Adventist church, certainly when I was growing up, was quite, there was a health message and all these messages, right? So you just did all these weird things, vegetarian, and the whole church, like the Sabbath thing was so, my parents weren't, they weren't extreme, but they were very committed, and they still are. So, there were some good things about it, like no makeup, no jewellery, and I was like cheering. It wasn't until later I realised all this peer pressure, other people sort of going, you should wear makeup and all this sort of thing, and I was like, I don't really want to do that. And I'd have, my cousin, she was also really committed to the faith, and she'd be like, why are you wearing that? God says blah, blah, blah. I was like, oh, brilliant. So,
yeah, interesting. Was your whole community Adventist? That is, were you surrounded by Adventist people, or did you know people who were kind of beyond that church, beyond that faith, and saw a different way of living in other kids or other people around you?
Excellent question. Look, Bundaberg's not a big town, so it was it's interesting because they built an Adventist primary school, and I was amongst the first children. Me and my siblings were amongst some of the first children to attend. So we went until I was in year 2, I went to the local public school, and then went to a public high school. But it's sort of, I guess it's like most churches, that they sort of encourage you to be in the world but not of the world type of thing. So, it's like, it wasn't openly sort of said, but we didn't really, we're sort of encouraged to stay within, like you have ties and, you be vulnerable, so to speak, with your people of your own faith, which kind of made it interesting because when you're children, like your age is such a big deal, like if people are 1 year older or younger, like they're just not your people. And I didn't really have anybody my own age that was at the church. So that was kind of a bit interesting. It was kind of like, surrounded by all these people, so to speak. Like my sister and brother, they had lots of people their own age, but in the church. But I didn't. So I was kind of like, I kind of felt a little bit like I was the add-on, the plus one type of thing.
Yeah, interesting. I should say, friends, if you have any questions or comments you want to offer to Sonia, put them into the comments, and Adrian will give them to me at the end of our conversation, and we can work with them then. So feel free to do that. So you grew up in an Adventist family, going to an Adventist church. Do you think you always had a sense of faith or an understanding of who Jesus was? Was that kind of always there? Did you have a moment where you kind of a conversion experience? What was faith like for you?
Yeah, I think, it was such an integral part of our upbringing. Like, my mum is such a faithful person. You couldn't help but have a faith in God growing up in that sort of a household. So every day we'd have morning worship. Mum would read to us, like, we'd have to go through and rehearse the Bible gem for the week, and I sort of say it rolling my eyes now because, like when you're 5, you just want to go off and play type of thing. But so, and my mum still does that when we go home and visit. Yeah, she'll read the Bible lesson, and then we'll repeat the Bible text for the week. And so, yeah, with that sort of environment, surrounded in that sort of an environment, and plus there's so in Adventism there's the Sabbath. So opening Sabbath is Friday sunset, and closing Sabbath is Saturday sunset. And so, yeah, we'd always have worship for both of those. And I think sort of that feeling, always having that feeling of reverence, that was something I remember. But I also too, when I was in my teens, the Adventist Church did this thing. I think it must have been it may have been around the world, but they gave a paperback of the New Testament Bible Good News version. And I remember I used to read that by torchlight, because I'm not a morning person, I'm an evening person. And when everybody in the house had gone to sleep, I'd grab out this little New Testament Bible and read it by torchlight. And I was probably 15, and that had a profound impact on me. And I really, I didn't have this experience where this big light came down, but I definitely felt this strong sense of God's presence, and that He loved me, and that He was real.
Any particular stories from the New Testament that you remember kind of really speaking to you or comforting you?
Not that stands out necessarily, but I remember that, the parables in the various Gospels, that just, it was so amazing, because it sort of would be almost like, that just is just exactly what I need right now. And I used to journal after I'd have those, I'd just read one chapter, and that would be it, and then I'd write my journal. And I remember in the journaling, it's actually the journaling I remember more so than necessarily the gospel stories itself. It was just so interesting how, I just felt like God was speaking to me, and it was pretty amazing, in the midst of nowhere.
Even in Bundaberg, yeah.
On a cane farm, correct, yeah.
Yeah, interesting. I love that for you. Okay, so tell us about, you spent your childhood there. How did your faith develop? Was there a time when your faith was shaken or challenged, kind of growing up, coming into adulthood?
Oh, definitely. I went to, so after I finished high school, I went to Avondale College and studied business there. Avondale College is, it's like the Adventist religious college, Bible college. And that was a really wonderful experience after being the only person my own age at Bundaberg in the church there, to come to be around all these people that, it's like, wow, this is cool. So, yeah, I really got to experience my faith there, and I had amazing opportunities to speak in front of all these different people about God and blah, 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 and go over to South Korea and as a student missionary. So it was quite special experiences. And then I finished my business degree and I moved to Sydney. And when I was 22, I was thinking that I always had thought that sexuality was choice. It was all about choice. So it never dawned on me that maybe I was same-sex attracted. But something had to happen right overt in front of me. Like one of my best friend, who was an Adventist as well, she'd come out to me and I was like, oh, wow, that's okay. But I should still love her, she's, and still the penny didn't drop. And she took me camping and with some friends we were in, I don't know, down Kosciuszko National Park, and this friend of hers was there with her girlfriend, and they were absolutely besotted with each other, in love, and it was so weird. I'm standing there and all these butterflies are going through my whole body, and I had this stupid smile on my face. I couldn't stop smiling, and I'm like, what was worse was that it was a 3-day hike, and anyhow, it rains full on, and we were stuck in this hut. Anyway, because it was such torrential rain, we couldn't go anywhere, and so we're stuck in this hut. And I'm saying to Wendy, my friend, I don't know what's going on, but I'm really, I think that maybe I'm same-sex attracted. Anyway, I think she must have been laughing her head off on the inside, thinking, oh my goodness, she finally realised. And it was I still remember saying to her, I couldn't even take ownership of it myself. I remember saying, do you think I am? It wasn't until she actually said, yes, Sonia, yes, Sonia, I think you are. I was like, that I actually was like, oh, well, Wendy says that I am, so I am. So, and that was such a wonderful experience that particular weekend, because suddenly all these things made sense. Like my sister had all these boyfriends, and I never once ever had a boyfriend. Like, I was like, oh, what's wrong with me? Like, no guys like me, they don't want to take me out, blah, blah, blah. My sister's always, there's always these guys, she'd always be going out to dates and everything, and I was like, oh, that just doesn't make any sense to me. And, and I remember teasing my sister, because, she was giving me a hard time, and I remember saying to her, well, look, I have all these friends. I know how to make friends with girls. Look, these are all of my friends. And she's going off on this great date with this amazing guy. He's the most cool guy in all of Bundaberg. Amazing house by the beach. Drove some really amazing car. Anyway, let me just say that she did remind me of that at I think it was my 30th birthday, when I was finally out to everyone. She goes, you remember that?
It's a thoroughly sibling thing to do, yeah.
Yeah.
So you had someone kind of affirm in you that you were, I think the language you used was same-sex attracted, and then you came back from that trip. What did that do in terms of your faith or your church participation? Was that I don't know what to do with this? How did that play out?
Well, after the joy, now I understand, now all this makes sense. There was the incredible trepidation of, I had nightmares, literally nightmares every night for 6 months. It was kind of like this concern of, because I grew up in the country, I'm living in Sydney, and this whole thing that ran through my head of, beware of the lion, the devil is like a roaring lion. And I'm like, oh, maybe I've succumbed to the devil. And I was so conflicted. And literally, every night having a nightmare, like serious nightmare about, oh, I've done the wrong thing. I've been tempted by the devil. And whilst the Adventist Church never overtly said, like they weren't like the Southern Baptists where they went out protesting and saying, you're going to burn, that type of thing. It was pretty clear cut, like their views on it. It was like modern day leprosy. So, and it was, I'd been so involved in the church and like campus ministries and things like that. Like I was preaching in my first year before the whole of the college, like 800 people type of thing. And I sort of thought, oh my goodness, if anybody finds out about this, they're going to laugh their head off. Like this is going to go like wildfire gossip. They're just going to be like, oh, So and Wendy, this friend of mine, she'd participated still at church, and she was actually a member and grown up in that particular college church, Avondale College Church. And her uncle wrote a letter to the minister and outing her, saying, you must do something about this. You need to excommunicate her. And that's what happened. And I was like, whoa, that's full on. I just need to very quietly step away and not be involved. And so that's what I did. And I never went back. Only when I went to visit my parents, and when I go to visit them, I go to the church that I grew up in.
Yeah.
So
you pulled away from church. Do you think your faith remained, or do you think there was a bit of a pause on that too?
Oh, I always sort of thought my faith was there. It's like I know God because of those experiences, like I talked about when I was reading the New Testament Bible. It was like I knew God, like I had that real presence that God was there for me, and He was there. So I sort of thought it was more about, fear of rejection by the church. But it was really not until we had the Wine with Cheeses studies last year that I sort of realised, like, I was so petrified that, like, almost as in hyperventilating type of, like, walking into your home thinking, these people are going to reject me. And it took a few times, like, went along, I was like, no, these people aren't actually rejecting me. Like, they just see me like a normal person. I'm not a leper to them. Like, I'm not, it's not like they're going to catch something bad by sitting next to me. And then it started to, I was facing this whole thing of, wow, I actually think it's me. I have these views about myself that I've sort of have, I've doubted my own capacity to be part of God's, church. And it was interesting because I'd done so much work in my life to find ways to, like, I read a lot about Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, like these people that had found ways to peacefully protest their oppressors. These big organisations or institutions that oppressed them and their people. And so in this roundabout way, I sort of thought, oh, it's all about the church, the oppressor is the church.
Sure.
And I went back to visit my family last year and my parents, and my dad had said to me, because we'd never openly spoken about my sexuality, really. I would always sort of skirt around it. And he'd said to me, Sonia, I think the devil's done some pretty, like he's become really clever, like you're born a certain way, you can't help that. But then there are these people that consider that the way you've been born is wrong and bad. Yeah. And so you're not, like, that's how you've been born, and God loves you and you've been created that way. So it was really quite affirming to hear that from my dad, and it really made me stop and think. It's like, whoa. And the realisation that I was my own oppressor, it was me within myself. And it was such a spin out because I sort of thought, whole equality debate and everything has brought a lot to the surface, but I think a lot's changed in community. Like back in the 90s, 25 years ago, community had a very different view about same-sex attraction, and I was sacked from a job because of it. Whereas things have changed a lot. Yes, the church's view probably hasn't. Certainly in the Adventist faith, I think. But community as a whole, it's not like you're going to lose your job if your name ends up on the front news of the newspaper to say that you're same-sex attracted. Whereas back then, that was definitely the case. So I think we've come a long way in that respect, but I think there's been a blessing for me having had that experience within my own self. And I haven't got all the answers. It's a journey, right? But when you have the experience of internally thinking you're this really bad person, even though you can't even help it, it's like, how weird is this? Like, someone up there's got a great sense of humour, The thing is that as I become more complete about who I am and how I've been born, I actually get to learn other people's experiences. I can at least pass. People don't even necessarily know that. It doesn't take them very long to work it out. They just see the way I do things. And anyway, as my stepdaughter says to me, Sonia, you've got a certain way, people know. But at least I can sort of pass. But, there are many other things that people discriminate other people on.
Totally.
And people don't even have a chance, in this country, there's all sorts of racial discrimination that goes on. And as I've shared with different people at certain points, and they talk to me about experience that they've had, it's like, with racism and things like that, it's like, whoa, and you just don't know what people's experiences are, because how someone treats you is very much, my experience of how people have treated me can be very different to one person can treat one person really amazingly and you think, wow, what a Christian they are, what a great person they are.
Sure.
But if you saw how they lived their life and how they actually interacted with other people, you're like, whoa.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, there's a lot I can learn. From the experiences I've had in my life, there's a lot I can learn about how other people experience life, even in Australia.
So you had a moment last year where I think you said, I recognised that I was my own oppressor, that it was actually my own narrative. What needed to happen then? Was it about forgiving yourself? Like what needed to happen for you to kind of sit authentically as you are today, in this church, in this community of faith, authentically with your sexuality, with your girlfriend? What needed to happen for you to be, for you to be released and comfortable?
Oh, well, I haven't got there yet. Okay. I was hoping for this session I'd have all the answers, but I haven't. Sorry. To be honest with you, I think what happened was, a few months ago, my nephew was, he's been really unwell, and he's only 2. And he and his family, my brother and their family, they live in London. And it all happened quite quick. He was falling over unexpectedly after being, having a really active childhood and all the usual things, randomly just falling over, and he couldn't stay sitting up in a chair. And then it got to the point where he couldn't actually swallow, so he had to be hospitalised. And within a week of being in hospital, because they had to put him on a feeding tube, the loss of conditioning, muscle conditioning in his legs meant he couldn't walk. And they were doing loads and loads of tests, and then they worked out that he had this genetic disorder. And I still remember like getting that message from my brother, and I remember going to get a coffee that morning, and just the realisation, it just hit me. It's like, how stupid this whole thing I've got in my own head about my sexuality. Like, here's my 2-year-old nephew who's literally fighting for his life because of something he had no choice over. You know, he was born that way, and he's got all these amazing medical people around him, thankfully, who can help him hopefully have a good life and survive through this. And here's me, you know, like, it turns out that this particular disorder that he has, only 3 children in 1 million are diagnosed with this a year. And only 1 out of 3 are boys. And usually they're 4 years old, and he was 2 years old. So it's pretty special. And I'm thinking, well, you know, seriously, like 1 in 10 people are same-sex attracted. Like, Sonia, it's really not that special. And I'm not going to die from it.
It's particularly not very special at Leichhardt. Like, we've got so many.
Correct. It's like, oh my goodness. It's like, what sort of an example am I? Like, I'm going to be going over there in January. It's like, if I head over there being ashamed of who I am, like, how lame is that? Like, you know, and here's my nephew. He's struggling to walk. You know, he's got going to have 2 physio sessions a day. He's 2. And, you know, it's like, well, harden up, Sonia. Like, I need to...
It's about perspective, right?
It's perspective, and also it's like, I want to be an example to my nephew to be proud of who you are. And, you know, like, if you can't walk very well, kids are pretty hectic about difference. And it's like, no, you know... So that really created a real change for me. It's like, well, I haven't got to the point where I just realise who I am is great just because of me. But at the moment it's like, well, I want to be an example to my nephew.
I love that.
And be proud of who you are. Yep. God made you the way that you are.
Yep.
And, you're amazing. No matter what people say about you, you're amazing. And God loves you the way you are.
Very true. How did you and Megan come across Leichhardt? I know I met you last year. How did you come into this community of faith?
So Megan, I was very lucky meeting Megan. We worked together, and Megan always, she just knew that God loved her. Well, I don't know, she just knew. And she's just much smarter than me. So, and she was going to another church, that she'd grown up in, you know, and she was in the leadership and had been for a gazillion years. And, but she knew that particular church probably wouldn't accept us if we went there as a couple, and we wanted to go somewhere, you know, be open as a couple in a faith community. And I'd sort of just accepted that, I know I love God, and God gets my commitment to him, her. But, you know, I just accept that churches won't be accepting. So, but Megan was like, no, I know that there are churches out there. So we went looking, and we sussed out a bunch of churches, which is kind of interesting during COVID because, it wasn't so easy. And I can't actually remember how we came across Leichhardt Uniting Church, but we did. And Megan had all these rules, you know, like about music, because she's musical minded. Yeah. She said, Sonia, seriously, if there's bad music, I can't deal with it.
I wholeheartedly sympathise with that. That's fine.
Yeah.
Yep.
So lots of boxes were ticked.
Yep. Yeah. I love that. And I'm so glad that you came through our doors, live stream door. Well, you came into our home, actually. That was the first time we met you. So that was great. Yeah, it's wonderful to have you in this community. So I'm just aware of time. The Bible reading from Hebrews, which Carol so beautifully kind of introduced and then Callan read, you chose that as part of this today, as a special passage in your life. Can you tell us a bit about why?
Oh, sure. So, like I said earlier, I sort of felt that same-sex attraction was like a modern-day leprosy in my mind. And I've had experiences, even when I been back home, it just so happened that the week's lesson was about homosexuality, and hearing, my parents have not said a word about any of that to anybody in that church, but hearing people I grew up with, their own real truths about what they think about it, it was confronting, like in this small group talking about the Bible and what their views about homosexuality was. It was really confronting, it's like, whoa. So, so for me, I really looked at that verse for me, all those verses for me, created for me an example of, Jesus came to this earth to give his life for us, and his own people actually killed him, and not in a fairly gentle way. It was brutal, and I thought, wow, okay, well, that's something that I can use as a way to live my life and be like Jesus was on this earth. And, my own people may think that I'm some filthy, person. But Jesus, he actually chose to come. I didn't choose. I was just born here and this is how I am. But he made the choice, and it's like, well, and he still faced the cross and, went home to be at God's right-hand side. So for me, that's something I think about. It's like, well, Jesus did this. He faced it for me, for all of us. It's an example of perseverance and following that path. I don't have all the answers. Like I said before, I think that I can't, there's someone out there with a really great, amazing sense of humour. But those verses have, been a guiding light, North Star.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Megan promised that she wouldn't cry, and she's crying, so,
Oh, she cries about everything.
All the time, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to finish with a couple of questions and comments from the commenters in the live stream. Paige has offered this comment, not a question, but just so grateful for you, Sonia, and so happy that you did this. Always such a pleasure to listen and learn from you. It's nice. Lyle has asked, I have always been struck by the kindness of Adventist people. Is this something you experienced growing up?
Yes, I did. I suppose it's kind of a bit interesting, and it's probably the same in many faiths. There's almost like this thing of, servanthood to others. So there's this great kindness that happens to other. It's like, well, what about me? I'm your child, or I'm your,
Yes.
I'm part of the flock.
Yes.
So what about us?
Yes.
But there is it is a real piece of the faith, is to do things for other people.
Okay.
And it's an important part of, it's about acts of service. It's not just about what you say, it's about what you do.
Yeah, love that. Adrian tells me that there are so many comments in the live stream of support and love, too many to read out. So when you're in a good headspace at home, go through and read them, because I think people are really loving on you. Two questions. So Emma Sproul says, wow, same-sex attraction being compared to modern-day leprosy. Your tapestry shows how far we've come, Sonia. Thanks for sharing so openly, which is lovely. And Athena wants to know, how did coming out to your parents go?
Oh, that's okay. So I came out to my mum. She came to visit me in Sydney, and I when I was in my 20s, and I said to her, please don't tell Dad. Look, I don't want you to, because I was so concerned that he'd kick me out of the family. Anyway, and she'd said to me, have you spoken to a psychologist? That was her response. Because I sort of said to her, look, I've got some good news for you. You won't have to spend money on me getting married. She's like, and she goes, well, have you thought about going to see a psychologist? Anyhow, which is a pretty incredible response given her faith and all of what I've shared. Anyhow, she kept the promise. She didn't tell my dad, and they came down. About 3 years later, they came down. I was living in Newcastle at the time, and my dad said, oh, look, let me service your car for you. Look, they came to my work, and anyhow, he was cleaning out my car. Oh, no, he went to the car. I think he wanted to get the manual for the car type of thing, which is in the glove box. And in the glove box was a Lesbians on the Loose magazine. Which back then was like sort of hardcore, like it had the logo was of these Doc Martens crossed and big socks. And anyway, he took it into my mum, and he's like, I think that I may have caused some issues in their marriage, like the fact that, because she kept the promise and she'd known for all those years. And yeah, so it did mean, and it was actually interesting because that was part of why my dad never openly spoke about it. And he knew what it was like to be kicked out of the family, which is what he sort of shared with me. He said, Sonia, I would have never done that to you, because was quite special to me, because it gave me some insight of what it must have been like for him to choose to be an Adventist, because like he said, Sonia, I would never do that to you. That's what happened to me. And I would never kick you out. It just helped me to realise that we all have our journeys, like whilst I might be so terrified about people not accepting me because of something I've been born with, everyone has their journey. It's just something else. And it just helped me to be more open to other people. We all have our experience. Mine might be, being okay about same-sex attraction, but for other people, it's something else. And it's as big a deal for them as my accepting my sexuality. And whilst it may not be illegal or as socially shameful as same-sex attraction was back in the 90s, it's people's own experience,
Absolutely.
Just because it may be socially okay, people's experience of their fears of themselves or not acceptance of who they are is just as real for them.
Sonia Milner, you are a gift. And seriously, you're going to blush. You are a gift, and one of the greatest moments of my last 3 years at Leichhardt was meeting you and Megan and having you be a part of Wine and Cheeses and embedding yourselves in this community. I'm really grateful that you shared so vulnerably of yourself, and you didn't mask language or, you were very real about the things that you experienced, which I'm really grateful for. And I know people who will connect with your story quite profoundly. And I really hope that as you continue to, reconcile yourself with yourself, I guess, and find some pride in who you are, that you'll be supported by this community of faith who love you very deeply. That's my prayer. So thank you very much.